Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Social Club at the End of the World. In this first hour and this first segment, we're going to be continuing our conversation that we started last week on refreezing the Arctic. And I want to welcome and thank all of my colleagues for being here. We've got Adam in Olympia, Washington. We got Dan in Chicago. We've got Miles in Calgary, Canada. And we've got my sister Victoria in Oklahoma. Great to see you all. I'm going to go on mute so everyone can say hello.
Hello to everyone. Good to be here. And few topics I prefer be discussing than this one. So, hello.
Awesome. Welcome, Dan.
Greetings from Oklahoma. I'm with Dan. I wish we weren't having to discuss it, but I think time is of the essence, so I'm glad we are.
Hello, everyone. It's Miles from nowhere. Well, I'm somewhere, but Miles with a Y. And I bring some eagle and goose down as a symbol of peace and prosperity. This I just learned on the weekend attending a session of dance at our Calgary Central Library. The Gitxaalik First Nation from northern British Columbia, southern Alaska. The goose down and eagle feathers, eagle down are symbols of peace and goodwill. So I bring those.
Awesome. Thank you, Miles. Alrighty, great to see you all. So the topic for today, and this is going to be just a very open discussion on refreezing the Arctic. First, let me welcome Jason. Jason, welcome. We just got started a couple of minutes ago. Great to see you, buddy. Jason from Long Beach. How you doing, Jason? Awesome. Welcome. All right. So the topic for this hour is refreezing the Arctic. Last time we delved into some possible engineering solutions for accomplishing that. And yesterday, I had a really interesting video conference with Guy McPherson. I know Jason saw it. And we talked about refreezing the Arctic and shutting down nuclear power plants as kind of two major foci, two major areas of focus. And the two are connected in that, well, different people have different views on, what's most important. But Guy McPherson and I agree that the number one goal that we as humanity should be striving for at this time and in whatever time remains is safely shutting down and disposing of and containing nuclear waste, so we don't have 440 nuclear power plants all going Fukushima at once when collapse of civilization happens. If collapse of civilization happens, and that's an important footnote that, to say the least, that we'll talk about. But the imperative for shutting down the nuclear power plants is simply this: that if we don't shut down the nuclear power plants, and civilization just collapses and everything goes Mad Max, those nuclear power plants will melt down and releasing vast amounts of ionizing nuclear radiation into the atmosphere, frying the atmosphere and giving us an atmosphere-free, radioactive, dry, hot, lifeless rock of a planet, which could prevent any life from ever reemerging on planet Earth ever again in the future. And so the big goal, as we see it, is shutting down nuclear. And from that perspective, refreezing the Arctic, relative to that goal, what does it give us? It buys us time. By refreezing the Arctic, we forestall the runaway climate change. We prevent it from taking off like a rocket ship this summer or fall or next summer, whenever we have an ice-free Arctic, and we're on a fast track for having an ice-free Arctic. So from the standpoint of shutting down nuclear, to the extent that's our main goal. Refreezing the Arctic buys us time. And but then, of course, there's a much broader perspective. If we look at myriad goals beyond just shutting down nuclear, like saving life on Earth, period, saving human life, saving as much complex life as possible. For those broader objectives, we also want to forestall and prevent abrupt climate change from taking off like a rocket ship. The single biggest lever we have to throw in that positive direction is refreezing the Arctic. And since we're at risk of having an ice-free Arctic as soon as this summer, we need to get on top of this right away, because to quote the president of Finland, if we lose the Arctic, we lose the planet. We lose habitat for humanity on the planet. We lose the ability to grow grains at scale, which is the basis for civilization. So with that as just kind of just some opening words, I'm going to go on mute and just kind of let everyone chime in and weigh in on this topic.
Jamin, I would just like to, I normally am not one for reading, but just dovetailing on what you said, I don't know if anyone saw the Washington Post article on April 9th, and I certainly won't read all of it, but I wanted to read some excerpts. Did anyone see it? Just thumbs up or? Okay. It was on the opinion page by Tom Tolles, who's been there forever. A lot of people wonder why we are doing so little to prevent the slow motion catastrophe of climate change. One theory is it's just too big a subject to understand. It's a big subject, all right, and a difficult one to address, but too big to understand it is not. Quantum physics is too big. Climate change is simple. I'll put it into one sentence. There are known heat-trapping gases, and if we add too much of them to the atmosphere, it will cause large, foreseeable damage to humans and natural environments. That is not too big to understand, and yet the majority of people understand it just fine. They're making the assumption that the political process will work normally and the government will take the steps necessary to deal with it, like government did with smog, with polluted air and water, acid rain, and with ozone depletion. The thing that is hard to understand for anyone is how people in positions to do something about it do nothing, or rather, they do everything in their power to stop action. The biggest, hardest thing to understand is how we have come to worship wealth, that it has completely overwhelmed and paralyzed any government's ability to do the necessary work. This is what ordinary people in America fail to grasp. It is this gigantic failure of ethics in the face of money that is too big to understand, and it violates everything we were taught about how government and American society works. It is not the role of individuals to solve climate change. It is the collective action problem, the kind of problem that governments were designed to solve. Even so, a lot of individual people have been working very hard on the climate issue. Their government has been worse than unresponsive, and now in the Trump era, government is simply paralyzed. It is actively making it even harder for people to take action on the climate, and government officials know well what they are doing. Climate change is not too big to understand. Oil companies have understood it for decades. Government officials understand it too. They do not care. They have put short-term personal interests first. They have sold their share of the earth to the highest bidder, and your share too. That's the really unbelievable, hard thing to understand. So, love comments.
Wow, that was really great, Victoria. I'm really glad you read that. Thank you. I have lots to say.
Well, I'll just jump in with a couple of quick comments. You know, what he's saying in the editorial, the opinion, is valid. It's definitely valid. I think, though, that, you know, there's a number of assumptions which still exist in the minds of people who are well motivated, who recognize there's a problem. Yes, they recognize something needs to be done, but what they don't really grasp is the potential time span that they're operating under. And so if you think, again, like some people do, that we have until 2100, 2070 to 2100, when we will get an accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that will, raise the temperature up, et cetera, and you'll have dystopia. That's unrealistic, or it's maladaptive to be thinking that way at this point in time. And if you look at refreezing the Arctic is an essential task that has to be carried out, because if it isn't taken care of, and it's not just the Arctic Ocean, it's also all of the methane leaking out as the tundra in Siberia and other places, in far north latitudes start to melt down. The permafrost is melting. Time is probably very, very short. So for some reason I've lost an image, but in any case, as human beings, we're going to have to ultimately come to the conclusion we've got to draw down the greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. And at this point in time, that is something which cannot be implemented, and it's going to be a tremendous expenditure of money, et cetera, et cetera. So refreezing the Arctic is a geoengineering strategy which would temporarily, give you more time. We need more time to be able to, evolve, I'm assuming, the necessary interventions to draw down the greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. There's already too much up there. It's not like it's a slow motion, train wreck. You already know that you have too much in the way of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to prevent a certain rise in average global temperature. So, human nature, the human species lives by modifying environments to survive. Most species just, genetically modify themselves to adapt to whatever environments they're in, or they die out. We tend to modify environments. Engineering is all about modifying environments. And that's what we do, and yet you have people in power, and I think Peter Wadhams points this out in his book, where the idea that they try to push out there is we have to adapt to the changes that are happening in the climate. Like we're just going to somehow evolve in some way to be able to survive conditions which human species can't survive. And so there's kind of a fundamental flaw in the thinking. And just to go back again to that, and then I'll shut up, to that opinion piece, it isn't hard to understand how the climate is probably already changed if you consider the jet stream becoming weak and essentially meandering. That's a change in the climate that we've all grown accustomed to forever. And when that happens, because of the decreasing differential between the Arctic and, say the equator, now we're subject to all sorts of forces which will result in food shortages, water stresses, et cetera. And so it's not hard to understand, but how do you get it out there when the climate scientists themselves, the ones who are the ultimate authority figures, have been intimidated and threatened, whether it's their livelihood or their lives, that they cannot stand up and speak out? I'm going to mute out and give it over.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan. Before we get next comments, I want to welcome Aaron. We have a new guest, so Aaron, feel free to chime in. I don't think I can see an image for you, but feel free to chime in. I'll just comment and then I'll go on mute myself. That the article is really hits the nail on the head, and I just want to point out that, you know, were this 1975 or 1980 or 1985, the conversation would be, hey, the urgent thing is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But now we are so far past that tipping point, and the effects of accumulated greenhouse gas emissions over time. The urgent step right now is refreezing the Arctic. Which wasn't even on the table, you know, last century. But now it's become the most urgent thing. So we need to adapt our conversation of what needs to happen in our focus. Anyway, with that, I'll go on mute.
Okay, I'll jump in here. And with respect to that article, I just coincidentally, prior to this hangout, I picked up this book from the library. I'm probably one of the first people in Calgary to sign it out from the library because it's dated into circulation here March 2018, but it's called Bush and Cheney, How They Ruined America and the World. And before I go any further, I just wanted to make the point that I'm not speaking from a perspective of, oh, well, we're up here in Canada, we're anyway superior and don't have exactly the same issues, because right now in my city, it's so ridiculous. They're continuing to spend millions of dollars on a bid for the 2026 Olympics. In addition, you may have heard of the Kinder Morgan pipeline controversy. It's going to be, if you haven't heard about it, you will be, because it'll be another Standing Rock. And it's essentially a concept, or the project is underway to triple the size of this pipeline to export tar sands oil, which has to be diluted with solvents like benzene and whatever else, various solvents to make this goo flow. And if it spills, it's a much more difficult product. It's perhaps impossible to clean up. But you know, the issues are global, and I think what we have to put on the radar when it comes to this issue of dealing with refreezing the Arctic is not to lose track of what the hazard has been that we've been up against for, I would say, a couple of thousand years at least, and that is deception. And we need to be calling deception out without hesitation when we see it. I won't go too much further, but on the cover of this book, it's really well done. It's by David Ray Griffin. Maybe you've heard of him. He's written extensively about the events of September 11th. And what he says is that it set off a chain of global crises and civil perils that have normalized a climate of fear and conflict, starting with the assaults on the U.S. Constitution. Griffin reviews various ways in which the world has been made worse over the past 15 years by the Bush-Cheney reaction to the attacks and the power plays for global influence. And he has these dominoes here, and it includes climate change. There's a thermometer in here. So you go from the disastrous effects of regime change operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, war on terror, the rise of ISIS, the Syrian conflict, European refugee crisis, the explosion of Islamophobia, going on down to murder by drone, growing existential threats of ecological and nuclear holocaust. So there's an entire book recently released. So with that, I'll just mute for now.
All righty. I have a something I'd like to sketch up for everyone, which is just kind of like a big picture of, and I just want to show kind of how I see the different facets fitting together that that we need to focus on. So let me just do a screen share here real quick. So if we have the solutions for refreezing the Arctic, I'm just going to put them in this column right here, right? I'm just going to put here, can everybody see that? Engineering solutions for refreezing the Arctic. The solutions, some of them already exist, some of them need to be invented. But that's but one pillar within a larger framework. Upstream, so I'm just going to put this arrow at the top going from left to right. So upstream is to the left, downstream is to the right. Upstream of that is the imperative for radical collective intelligence, creating a vastly higher form of intelligence than anything terrestrial we've seen on Earth to date, which can generate these solutions, right? But upstream of that is what I call a new story for humanity. And that'll be the topic that we'll discuss in an hour and a half from noon to 1 Pacific time. A new story for humanity. That new story, I believe, is essential for inspiring people to basically stop feeling depressed and feeling like a victim and oh woe is me and all is lost, to saying, hey, let's come up with a new story that will actually inspire people into action, because that's what's really missing right now. There's a lot of talk, but not enough action. The first action I maintain is we need to get people together like we're doing right here on this video conference. And I'm so grateful for all of us that we're here and for all the folks watching. We need to get people into the radical collective intelligence, co-creating it and operating it so that we can generate all these engineering solutions for refreezing the Arctic. But the engineering solutions clearly are not enough. We also need what I'll just call social, political, and spiritual solutions. So, for example, just to put it in really simple terms, imagine that we come up with this new story for humanity that inspires people to join the radical collective intelligence, and we generate all the engineering solutions that we need. We still haven't solved the political problem. So we then apply radical collective intelligence for coming up with the political, the social, the culture solutions, so that we wake people up and we, for lack of a better word, activate people, right? People need to become active in lobbying government, speaking out, participating in demonstrations, and participating in the radical collective intelligence, which I believe will be our engine for the near term and long term for generating all the solutions we need across all these realms. So do you guys see how this all fits together? It's kind of like a clock or something, right? Everything touches everything else. And, we need to turn this and the imperative of refreezing the Arctic into a mass global movement, right? We need people pouring in to the radical collective intelligence, which we're pioneering on radish.org. We need people pouring in to work with us to generate all the solutions we need: engineering solutions, political solutions, media solutions, memes that spread, and as well as refining and perfecting this new story for humanity. Because coming up with a story that's inspiring in the midst of all this ongoing tragedy, that's a real challenge. Wouldn't you agree? Stopping screen share and going on mute. Love to hear everyone's thoughts.
I'll just pipe in here, and I think with any initiative, we need to capture the hearts and imaginations of people, and through the arts and through other levers, I suppose you could say. On my screen, what you're seeing is something that's really been disturbing me for the last day since I read this posting. And these are the title here says, biologists in Canada and the United States are stunned as the South Selkirk caribou herd in British Columbia, and it also extends into, I believe, it's either Washington State or Idaho. This caribou, South Selkirk caribou herd is down to 3 caribou, and they're all female. And on the radio show, it's called The Current, we explore what, if anything, can be done to save them. You know, and there's caribou in the north as well, big herds that are threatened. And there's this herd of caribou, well, down to 3 now. And it touches me because back in 1985 or 1986, I had the privilege of actually seeing this herd back then. And it was rare then. But, you know, I'm thinking there's probably definitely a climate change link to the fact that these caribou down in this part of the country are disappearing. And I'm thinking, you know, we could take something like these caribou and their plight and you know, publicize it, use it as leverage to get people to think about, well, what can you do to save them? Well, we have to refreeze the Arctic. Going on mute.
I would say just 2 things. I'll try to be brief. You know, self-interest is what activates human beings. And if part of your identity is, you know, is embedded in a group, then the self-interest or the group interest will motivate people. If people don't understand that their self-interest, their very ability to survive, the ability of their family to survive is at stake, it's very hard to motivate people. But you see it, you know, here in Chicago, I'll give you an example. The people in Chicago who work for units of government, city, county, state. Now, these are individuals who are from different races, different backgrounds, etc. When they feel that their pensions are at stake, they're no longer going to have them, or they're going to be cut to a level where the person is going to be in near poverty or poverty, they become very, very activated, tremendously activated. And again, it's because self-interest is at stake. Right now, we have this population here in the United States, and I guess you can generalize it to, you know, most of the developed world. People do not understand that their self-interest, their survival is at stake. And unless that gets into them, they're not going to stand up and say, we got to have something done. You know, last thing, you know, I've said it before, if men and women, but, you know, men are generally very, very concerned with sports. They like to follow sports, participate in sports. And men can many, many times evolve a very, very sophisticated understanding of strategies that are employed in different games. And so they are constantly learning, they're constantly talking about it. It's, you know, it's 24/7 sports, analyzing the game, talking about this player, etc. If men were able to focus that kind of mental energy onto what we're talking about in terms of climate change, you know, the Arctic's in meltdown. That means this is going to happen. What kind of strategies can we employ to maybe save the game, you know, win the game, make a comeback here? And we have to recognize that. I don't think there's any lack of intelligence, you know, that where people cannot understand what's going on with climate change. It isn't understand. You don't need a PhD in physics to understand basically what's happening and probably what needs to be done. And I think that we have to be able to find a way through radical collective intelligence to be able to get people to understand that, you know, the gun is really pointed at your head and your children's heads. You've got to understand and start thinking about it in that kind of a way. Okay, I'm done. I'm muting out.
Hurricane Victoria, love. Oh, Aaron, go ahead, please.
Hey, Jamin. I've been a long time follower of your work, and I live in Friday Harbor. You came out to Friday Harbor a while ago.
Oh, yes, sir. Did we meet up there?
We did, yeah. Yeah, it was good.
Oh, yeah. Yes,
Guy was up there too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining. Great to see you.
Anyways, you know, I find the whole conversation interesting, but you know, it's like, what can we do, right? Because you know, it's a challenge, you know, for any individual person to do something right now. But I was just curious about, you know, the Haida Gwaii experiment, where they dumped a bunch of magnesium, I think it was, or iron, into the ocean. And, you know, supposedly it caused, you know, the fish that year, the sockeye return that year was like 10x what was normal. So I was just curious, you know, I mean, that's, you know, anybody, right, can get a boat and dump iron into the ocean, right? I mean, that's something that anybody actually can do. While it may not be terribly responsible, and it may not refreeze the Arctic directly, you know, I just want to know what you guys think about that.
So dumping this compound into the ocean, how would that impact the Arctic, even indirectly? Aaron?
Well, so they were talking about, you know, how basically it was causing algae growth, and the algae was, you know, I could pull up the article. You know, it was something that the tribal community in Haida Gwaii decided may help the fish stocks in the area. And you know, it you know, had something to do with, you know, the algae, you know, eating up carbon dioxide, you know, something to that extent.
Okay, gotcha. So it's really a move to sequester carbon by stimulating algae growth. Of course, the algae will sequester carbon as they grow, and then the fish eat the algae, and you know, everybody's happy, kind of thing. So I get it. Yeah. So there's that's an example of yeah. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I'm done.
Yeah. So that's an example, Aaron, of, you know, of one of the myriad solutions that need to be explored and analyzed for us to determine the entire set of solutions that we need. But to bring it back to the Arctic, it's quite possible that we have a window of months, only months, in which we can act to refreeze the Arctic sufficiently to stave off the exponential runaway abrupt climate change, you know, release of methane, loss of the jet stream, loss of crops, collapse of civilization, et cetera, et cetera. So we're kind of focusing on that particular issue right now.
I'll just chime in and say that I do recall seeing Paul Beckwith talking about that strategy, and if I recall correctly, he was saying it holds quite a bit of promise compared to the other things that might be done.
For sequestering carbon, is that what you're saying, Miles? In other words, that's
yeah. Balance, bring pH back to the ocean, I guess, as well.
Right. And so that's, you know, that may be a vital solution for the health of the ocean. I'm just pointing out that we have, no pun, but a much bigger fish to fry, which is refreezing the Arctic. We've got months in which to do that. We may have years or decades to sequester carbon, but if we don't have a viable planet in which to do any of the other solutions, because, you know, civilization has collapsed, we're in a Mad Max state, then we won't even be able to get to the other solutions. I'm not just saying that we should do these sequentially. Maybe we should do them in parallel, but this conversation is supposed to be focused on refreezing the Arctic. But again, that's part of a bigger picture, as I was pointing out on the whiteboard that I drew a few minutes ago, is to refreeze the Arctic, we need societal change. We need for humanity as a whole to wake up and to come together in collective intelligence and to pressure governments, to transform governments if necessary. So it is part of a much bigger picture, and it definitely needs to be looked at holistically. But I'm trying to focus on, like, what is the critical path that can get us to actually refreeze the Arctic, ideally by this summer.
Well, I know that we, maybe think eventually we'd like to get rid of money, because money is a poison, as Adam points out. However, what we need to do is really wake people up, as you say, because right now in Canada, the craziness of the federal government, because this Kinder Morgan pipeline from Alberta tar sands to Vancouver, British Columbia, is in such a deadlock of protests, they're now saying, well, Kinder Morgan, don't leave. They're even talking about subsidizing them by $2 billion, subsidizing this corporation, this pipeline corporation, $2 billion, talking about 4-point-something billion for a bid for the Olympics, which is probably not even enough. Anyway, there's billions of dollars being spent on these ridiculous projects, which, when the Arctic needs freezing, are just insanity, right? And so we have to wake people up and say, emergency funds have to be diverted to doing something about preserving that air conditioner up there.
I'll jump in here. Excuse me. Pardon me, Damon, when you were speaking about months or perhaps a year, I think it's easy to forget the basic physics of why that urgency exists, because if we wait till the ice is gone, it is virtually impossible. I mean, McPherson, Wadhams, Beckwith, all of them say the energy that will be needed to make ice at all again is just out of even their realm of possibility. So we have to do something while there is ice to build upon. And I'll just throw out an idea that I have, and I don't know what you all will think, but in speaking to several people here in the Midwest, I think it's going to take a celebrity person, somebody that most people trust. Right now, they don't trust politicians or the government, obviously mainstream media, even cable. And I know that we've thrown that idea out a couple of times, but I really would like to throw it out there and say, I think if people heard from someone they trust, and it would probably need to be, unfortunately, a celebrity, someone they follow. So I'll mute out.
That's absolutely vital, and I encourage everyone, all of us, to constantly put the word out to all of our friends, all of our circles, of what's going on and the urgency to spread the word. Because if we do that, eventually the word will get to the ears of celebrities and people who can have, a lot of influence because they've got, a lot of followers and whatnot. So this applies not just to celebrities, but to those who can reach the ears of celebrities. In short, it applies to everyone. We need to get the word out. We need to talk. We need to blog. We need to Facebook post. We need to tell our friends, join us, join this movement, and make your voice known. Join the collective intelligence, because it's by coming together that we're going to figure out how to refine our message and how to build this global movement.
Just to make a point, where we have a lot of things going on in the world today that the news is constantly focused on. So we see that Trump sends over some missiles to Syria, and that's big news. But it's talked about in a way which is very childlike and is ignoring what really is going on. For example, It appears to be the case that Israel wants to take over part of Lebanon because of the water stresses that exist in that region. That is connected to climate change. We also have the glaciers melting, which supply water to northern India, etc. This is something which is very real, and these kinds of events which are causing war to break out because of resource depletion. This is because of climate change, including, you know, the massive immigration to Europe, people coming up across the United States border because they can no longer have sustainable farming in areas where they formerly could. These things the dots need to be connected, and issues which people can kind of relate to because it's just put in their face day after day in the news needs to be connected up to climate change. And ultimately, again, I know it's not a happy proposition and people don't like hearing it, but my belief is based on human nature. Until people understand the gun is at their head, they may have to soon contemplate how they want to die, how they want their children to die if it gets to a certain point. Until people can really relate to it on that kind of a level. It's about your own survival. It's not some abstract proposition that maybe it'll happen, 100 years from now. This is what's necessary, and I do think energy focused on figuring out how to connect, with radical collective intelligence, but time is short, and unless people understand the danger they're actually in, their loved ones are in, we'll all go over the cliff, as Guy McPherson likes to constantly point out, looking at the iPhones. So I'm going to go mute out.
Thank you, Dan. And before other comments, I want to welcome Typing Piper is the handle, who just joined. Typing, welcome. Great to see you. You're on mute. Feel free to unmute. There you go. Typing, you're still on mute. You have to toggle it one more time to unmute so we can hear you. There you go.
Is it unmuted?
Now it's unmuted. Go, go, go. You go.
Thanks for letting me join, and I've been watching your videos for the last couple weeks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Welcome. Welcome.
I would like to say that I'm getting some feedback here. Are you hearing that?
I'm sorry. Dan, to mute your microphone. Thank you, Dan. Go ahead, typing.
Okay. Thank you. There was an idea that I had a couple weeks ago about refreezing the Arctic, and it had to do with old World War II technology called Pykrete. And simplified, it's a mixture of fresh water and sawdust, but it creates this super dense ice that is essentially bulletproof. The military is looking at using it for building large aircraft carriers that essentially couldn't be blown out of the water. And the lifespan of these ships was supposed to be over 100 years. It was supposed to have a cooling system that ran through the ice that kept it afloat and made sure that it didn't thaw out while it was in the ocean. And I was thinking maybe taking that old technology, I mean, this is World War II, and it should be easier to make it now and actually implement it in a way to create artificial islands within the Arctic that could be used to anchor reflective material.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you. See, these are exactly the kinds of engineering solutions we need to come up with and brainstorm. And you may have seen some of our introductory videos on radical collective intelligence itself and the brain swarming method. So this would be a perfect one to incorporate into the brain swarm that we still need to develop graphically, kind of like a big tree structure, looking at all the options and all the resources in order to refreeze the Arctic. So that's a great example of a possibility that needs to be explored and refined. So thank you, Typing. That was great stuff.
Can you hear me? I'd like to join in.
Yeah, go ahead, Miles. And then I see Jason wants to talk as well, but you go ahead, Miles. No, sorry, not Miles. I meant to say Adam. Sorry, Adam.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me all right? Because I'm on my cell phone. And
yeah, we can hear you just fine. Go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I like what Victoria had to say about getting celebrity on there, and I do agree with Dan also that we have to that people need to understand the problem. But I'd like to just pose a little different thing and then ask a question. And so a contractor, a big contractor, is set up with modeling programs, and they know they would be able to determine very quickly how to approach the whole situation. And up there, they would map the whole Arctic, and they would determine where the reflective film would be deployed, and where seawater pumps would be deployed, and et cetera, et cetera. And they could do this very quickly. And, you know, after 9/11, which happened in 2001, by 2008, we had already spent over $3 trillion in Iraq, and Halliburton received the no bid contract. So we can do that, but so it is surprising to me that our government isn't stepping up, and so there is some people. Finland, I know, is doing a study, and there's probably a few others, but really we need to have a contractor to come on board, a big contractor like Halliburton or Bechtel or somebody like that, Fluor, you know, some big, huge contractor that can really get up there and get the job done and hire subcontractors and things like that. And it just surprises me that our government isn't making this happen. And so here's my question / suggestion or thought here. I'm wondering if we couldn't go on the Daily Journal of Commerce and put an ad out for contractors to start bidding on refreezing the Arctic. I mean, you know, public agencies, and you know, they put ads out on the Daily Journal all the time. I don't know, I've never tried it, but I wonder if we couldn't do that as a group and just, you know, state on there that, you know, we're not going to pay you, but somebody needs to do this, and somehow the money will have to come up somehow. I'm not sure. So I'll mute out because I'm on my cell phone, and I just left my image up there because I'm on my cell phone. Okay, thanks.
Very good, Adam. Thank you. Yeah, no, certainly. Once we, as humanity, collectively get our heads out of our butts, then you know, governments will start to, you know, put out these calls for contractors, and they'll move very quickly. This can be done very quickly. That's the thing. So the problem is not that the governments don't know that they can hire contractors, or that the governments don't have the money. It's that the governments themselves are deeply dysfunctional, and they are full-scale participants in the delusion that everything is okay and we just need to keep doing business as usual and keep bombing other countries and whatnot, and everything will just be fine. So the government is part of the problem, unfortunately not part of the solution at this point, which is why it is so imperative that we come up with solutions for transforming politics, for transforming government, transforming governance, and you know, quite frankly, our entire modality of life. So the big set of questions for loosening up this whole conversation are, how do we A, get people to wake up, and B, come together so that as a unified movement, we can tackle these problems. If the people of the world came together, and we're working very hard at building a platform to enable people to do that on radish.org. But in the meantime, there are myriad ways we can come together: meetups, Facebook groups, so many different vehicles. But we need to keep coming together and passionately encourage others to join us. Because if the people don't get behind this, the government is not going to get behind it. The government is going to follow the will of either the oligarchs or the people. Those are the two things that really push the government: the oligarchs and the people. Well, the oligarchs, we know what they're doing. They're just trying to make more money. The people need to come together. And we've got a Sierra Club dinner coming up on April 26th in Berkeley, California. That's a physical forum for people to come together. We have the social club at the end of the world. And then, by the way, we're going to need to shift gears here in a couple of minutes, end this broadcast and recording, and start another one. You're all welcome to join the next one. And I'll email it out and also post it on my Facebook, Google+, and also on the YouTube video. Jason, you wanted to say something, buddy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to say something actually about refreezing the Arctic as well. I liked what he had to say about I believe it was fresh water and sawdust. I mean, if you look on a basic Google search, you see about this professor in Arizona who put this out to his students, and they came up with the idea of making 10,000 air-powered, like wind-powered pumps that spray cold water over existing caps to add to the sea ice on top of the existing caps, so that it would have longer until it melted, and that would only do 10% of the sea ice. But anyways, I mean, the only way to start doing it is to start trying different methods. And I guess it's a good question to ask about contractors, but there's no way to look into a contractor if you don't have any money to pay them. So I'd imagine that even if a PR stunt was going to be done to try to use several different methods. So another article talked about in Switzerland, they're using snow blowers to try to, I guess, cover existing glaciers with snow and ice so that it hopefully kind of prolongs their melting process, I guess. And, I guess, this seems like a great idea with the fresh water and the sawdust, if you could try to create artificial islands and work off of that to really try to rebuild it in sections or something. Because it sounds like that's maybe what's necessary. So I don't know if it'd be interesting to maybe try to reach out to these people who did this one study in Arizona to see if they would like to even join this call to talk about how they would see that functioning and if it's possible. Or
absolutely, if you want to take that on, Jason, go for it. As far as contractors, I just want to say one last point, and then we got to wrap because we got to kick off the next one on radical collective intelligence, which will be a whole new video conference with a whole new link. So I'll send that out. But as far as contractors, I actually love Adam's idea. Yes, it's true. We don't have the money to start paying the contractor right now, obviously. However, if we get contractors alerted to the fact that there is this huge possibility, this huge potential up there, the governments haven't quite put out the bids yet. But if you want to get the jump and communicate a proposal to the world as a contractor, that may actually help, wake people and governments and media up. Bechtel Corporation, which I used to work for years ago. Hey, Bechtel has a proposal for refreezing the Arctic. That would be big news, right? If a major engineering firm were to do that. Anyway, I'm going to, we're going to have to close out here so I can start the next one. Any last words? Super quick. I'm talking like sound bites of 10 to 15 seconds before we close off. All right. Great to see you all. Thank you all for participating. And please spread the word. And I'll be kicking off the next one in a couple of minutes here on radical collective intelligence. Look out for the link. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.